Hi everyone! So I'm super tired, so hopefully this video doesn't turn out to be really rambly, but I feel like I'm going to be tired every single day because there's a lot of walking and a lot of stress and it's a lot of work, but that's okay. So I'm going to attempt to make a video. Hopefully it goes well. I'm going to try to start kind of towards the beginning, but I have a feeling that I'm just going to have to do a whole bunch of videos on slightly different topics and they might not be chronologically in order, but that's okay. That is just an example, if any of you are considering the Horner Fellowship or have been on it already, of there's a lot going on. You learn so much, and clearly it's like a different culture and a different language, so you're working with that every single day, and so I think it's probably more tiring than if I were doing research in the States or in another state or something like that, because you don't have the cultural stress and change and everything happening. So I've already visited a ton of universities. I'm just going to look at my schedule real quick. Right now it is Friday evening here, but it's Thursday in Arizona. So I've already been here I've been visiting libraries for about 4 days now, and in that time I've visited Sophia University, Hosei University, Tokyo University Library, and the archives. The O'Hara Institute for Social Research, which is part of Hosei University, but it's a little bit different. I'm gonna have to explain how the university system and libraries, academic libraries in particular, work here, because it is very different. Totally seems the same on the surface. Turns out it is not at all, like completely different, in a really interesting way. I've also been to the National Diet Library, which I know a lot of people go to. This is, if you had to compare it to something, basically the equivalent of the Library of Congress. So it's the library for the Japanese government. So they're the ones that like collect all the material that are produced and everything like that. But even then, it's not like an exact comparison. It's different still. So I'm going to try to like explain what I've learned or relate what I've learned, but there's a few different things going on here, so I'm going to do my best. So besides being like completely wiped every day, there's also a language barrier, even though I have interpreters. Some of the meetings I have actually set up on my own outside of JLA, and so I'm interpreting on my own, and my Japanese is, let's say it leaves a lot to be desired. But even then, like, clearly there's difference in language and understanding of things, right? So I've been running into that a lot when trying to define social justice, which, like, the concept is there, but the way people perceive it and define it, like, clearly in different cultures is a very different thing. Even if we're talking about the same thing, there are like different ways of explaining it. So that's a whole added thing. So I'm going to try to explain everything as best I can, but take it with a grain of salt. It probably won't be perfect. This is where research comes in. Good thing we are all librarians. So today I met with a bunch of activists and social movement leaders, and a couple things like that. I'm going to do another video on that, but I don't know how much I'm going to talk about, even though honestly today's meetings were probably some of the best. Like, they were very, very good and extremely powerful, in a lot of different ways, but to protect their privacy and some information I don't know how much I'm gonna talk about that, which is a little bit of a bummer because it's so important, but it is what it is. Like, their identity and privacy is a lot more important than my research, clearly. Okay, so to start off, backtracking a little bit, in a nutshell, this is way overly simplified. I think I might do a completely separate video on the history of social movements in post-war Japan, so like 1950s and on, because understanding the history of social movements and radical activism is like absolutely key to my topic, and it is complicated and there is a lot of it. But you can look at my Tumblr, the blog that I have going for this trip, and I've been posting a lot of recommended readings and like quick brief synopses and everything of post-war social movements in Japan, which really helps contextualize my research. So when you're listening to these videos, like, I seriously highly recommend that you read those things, because they're critical, like really, really important to understanding why I'm interested in the topic and why the topic is so important and why I chose some of the universities that I chose to go to. These weren't accidental choices. So like Sophia and Hosei University and Tokyo University, have like deeply important and relevant histories having to do with student social movements, and in some cases repression, in some cases violence, and in one case the death of a student activist. So please, if you have time, look at those things, but I'll do another video. So one of the most interesting things I've been learning throughout some of these meetings is how academic libraries, but in particular the information economy and jobs in Japan, work. So it's not enough for me just to study like this one topic, social movements in Japan. This isn't surprising, but clearly there's a lot more that goes into social movements and librarianship and how librarians practice, because it is completely different than it is in the US. So librarianship is a career for us, right? We get our Masters of Library Information and Science, and then that is our career. We have that job for as long as we want, you know what I mean, with like within parameters or whatever. Not the same in Japan at all. Could I have maybe looked this up ahead of time? Absolutely. Would I have understood it in the context that I do now? No, I would not. It has taken librarians mentioning this over and over again multiple times for me to finally like barely understand what they're talking about. So it turns out that librarians in Japan, public librarians too, are considered civil servants. So what that means is that they are employees of the government. And you're probably thinking, well, that's not really novel. I mean, we kind of are too. We're employees of like a city or like some sort of type of government or something like that. But this is so hard to explain. It's very different. So Japan has ministries that basically oversee different sectors of society, and I have notes in the background. I'm just gonna like keep switching back and forth because this is a lot of information. So one of the ministries, MEXT, MEXT, is the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, and libraries are under that ministry. What that means is that even though the National Diet Library, which is the Library of Congress equivalent, is like the largest library and affiliated with the government, it is not affiliated with the same ministry and does not make any rules for any other library or really have much to do with them in that sense. The Ministry of Education and Culture, etc., MEXT, they're the ones who set all of the priorities, all of the like basically rules of how libraries, public and academic, should work. Again, please take what I'm saying with like a slight grain of salt, because I may or may not be like exaggerating or getting some details like very slightly wrong or something like that. But so it's this ministry that decides all of that, but clearly like the ministry isn't run by librarians or by information professionals, right? But add to that, if you are a civil servant, so because librarians work for this ministry, they work for the ministry, they don't work for a library. Civil servants in Japan, there is job rotation. There are like maybe very few companies in the US that practice this, but this is like a very, very common practice in Japan that every 5 to 7 years, if you are employed through one of these ministries, you rotate to a completely different job. So, for example, one of the librarians I met who works for the National Diet Library, she didn't choose to be a librarian for the Diet Library. That was next up in her rotation. Before that, she was in IT. And I can't remember what she said before that, but some of the other librarians at the university, one of them said that they had been an accountant before. One said that they were also in IT, and then they became librarians, and this happens like every 5 years. And on top of that, there's this, it's so complicated. There's, for me, because clearly this is all new information, right? But on top of that, a lot of work is done through, they aren't temp agencies in the way that we understand it, but it's done through like temporary contract type employment. So people who shelve books in libraries, people who fix damaged books in libraries, people who work at front desks like reference desk. That is all contract-based, very temporary work. You get a contract for 3 to 5 years. After that 3 to 5 years, you were done. You might be able to renew it again for a year, but I hear it's pretty unlikely. So that's in addition to all of this, meaning that you have to constantly retrain people, meaning that there is no specialty, no subject specialty, no specialty of knowledge within academic and public librarianship. It's just every 5 years you might rotate in that position, whether or not you chose it. And there's some caveats here and there, like sometimes you don't always have to go, like it's more complicated than this is what I'm saying, but that's it in a nutshell. In addition to that, because of that system, you don't get a Master's of Library and Information Science to become a librarian. There are 1 or 2 universities here that do provide like tinier certification courses or like additional courses where you could seek out new training, but that's pretty much the extent of it. There are librarians, for example, a couple I met at some archives who trained as archivists overseas and then came to get a job in Japan, which is a little bit different. From what I understand, their jobs haven't rotated. Because they're in a very specific like research institute. So that's another thing. Because of this whole system, libraries do not function or are not organized in the same way because people don't have that specialty in cataloging or in a subject area or something. Everybody is encouraged to be generalists, and that's like really rewarded. And there's like benefits and detriments to that system, right? So some of the arguments they make for the system make total sense, but there is always like a cost on the other hand, right? And so because there isn't any specialized knowledge, academic libraries don't really perform the same functions or don't necessarily do the same things because those librarians are going to rotate out again soon. So people who work in academic libraries were used to having like extremely specialized collections, right? We do have a general collection, but we also have like very important specialized collections that we use to like help our faculty and help our students and stuff. Those don't really exist in academic libraries here. Almost all academic libraries just have extremely general collections, like very, very general collections that are just to support learning. Faculty can request books, but all of those like specialized archives and information, those are all organized under they're like specialized research institutes. So, for example, Tokyo University has like 30 libraries or something, and at first I was like, whoa, that's ridiculous. They must have a huge number of students that go here. But they have far less students than go to ASU, so I was a little confused, and it turns out every single department basically has their own library. And so there are librarians that work in that, but they usually rotate into that. And so they're specialized collections that aren't part of the bigger library that have people working in them to support the faculty in that specific area. But again, because of so much turnover, like cataloging is really difficult, and they very often have to hire or purchase data. They have to hire people to catalog, or specialized companies, but that's really expensive. And most schools, at least in the Tokyo area, are all private, meaning that they aren't public, they aren't getting public funding, so they're very, very short on cash. There are very few librarians because they rotate out. They're very understaffed. Clearly, this is a global problem, right? All of us, I'm sure, have experienced this in some form or another. So again, it's not like completely novel. It just exists in like an entirely different system that is organized and maintained by this ministry that has this job rotation. Yeah. So I was a little confused in some of my meetings when I was asking these very specific questions, because I was approaching it from this like American-centric, westernized perspective of how library employment works and what type of skill. I was assuming they had a certain knowledge and skills. Not ever. I did consider it, but it's very different, like talking to people when you finally realize, oh, this is very different. Like research can't translate perfectly. I can't just easily study a library collection. I can't just walk into an academic library and be like, tell me what type of books you collect and how you do that. What are your collection policies? All these things, because it's totally different, completely different. Even if they had the exact same system of employment, it would still be different in the way they do things, just because life is different, places are different, right? So I hope that explained things a little bit. Again, I think that there is a lot I'm missing, because I've gotten this information through like bits and pieces every now and then through certain like comments and discussions in a couple of these interviews that I've been attending. I tried to look a little bit of it up, but again, it's still like something that I'm not used to, so it's taking me a minute to fully understand and grasp how this system is inherently affecting information dissemination and like everything beneath that, right? Librarianship practice, like the very act of education and information literacy, and yeah, like so many things. Political literacy. Yeah. So that's one of like I wouldn't say the biggest, but one of a big like revelations that I've experienced throughout the past couple days is just the complete difference in our practice, and therefore maybe this is why during some of my interviews, answering questions about supporting social justice movements and doing outreach in the library and information literacy, it's not exactly translating, right? So I'm going to be talking about a lot of the interviews I've been doing at each campus, again omitting some details because for privacy reasons, but yeah, so keep all of this in mind, I guess, in my future videos. when thinking about and talking about how academic libraries and librarians are supporting human rights and social justice within an educational and information literacy context. And then I'll make another video going more into detail about my project as well, because again, very complex, long history of social movements. So I think I'm going to end here. I'm already at 20 minutes, which is way longer than I was hoping to go. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening. Hope you're all doing well. And on Thursday, it's Thursday there, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.